Alrighty, we'll get started. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Navpreet Dillon, a fellow at Shock Trauma and Education Committee Chair of the AAST Associate Membership. I am joined today by Dr. Kofi Besef, a Chief Resident at Stanford University and Chair of Scholarships, Awards, and the Development Committee. We are honored to moderate tonight's session, Different Practice Setups for Acute Care Surgery, sponsored by the AAST Associate Members, East, and SCC PDS, featuring Dr. Thomas Duncan, Dr. Bracken Burns, and Dr. Michael Rotondo. So really quickly, this session is a new addition to the lineup of talks that we have this year. Reason being is that our associate members voiced that they wanted to know what the scope of acute care surgery could potentially entail. And as trainees, we often have a limited view of what a career in acute care surgery or trauma looks like. But the beauty of the field is that there can be a lot of varieties. We hope that tonight's session will provide insight into this. Without further ado, today's agenda, Dr. Besef will introduce our panelists today. Then we'll go into an in-depth dive into different types of ACS practice descriptions. We'll then have certain questions that Kobe and I will ask our panelists, and then we'll open it up to the floor. And then I have a few quick announcements at the very end.
Great, thank you so much. So we're honored and excited to have a wonderful panel of speakers today. In the order that they will be first presenting in, I'll go ahead and introduce them. First is Dr. Thomas Duncan, who attended medical school at Midwestern University, Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine. He went on to complete his residency at King Drew Medical Center and currently holds multiple appointments where he wears multiple hats as the Trauma Medical Director for Ventura County Medical Center. He's also a core surgical faculty member for Community Memorial Health System. He's also the medical co-director and president of Anacapa Surgical Associates. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Bracken Burns. He attended medical school at Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine, completed his residency at Ohio University, and completed fellowship at the University of Cincinnati. He also holds multiple appointments, including Professor of Surgery at East Tennessee State University, Trauma Medical Director for Johnson City Medical Center. He's also the Corporate Medical Director of Trauma Services for Ballad Health, and is the President-elect of Medical Staff for Johnson City Medical Center. And last but not least, we have Dr. Michael Rotondo, who attended medical school at Georgetown University School of Medicine, completed his residency at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital, and completed a fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. He also holds multiple appointments, including Professor of Surgery and Vice Dean for Clinical Affairs. He's also the Chief Executive Officer at University of Rochester Medical Faculty Group, the Senior Vice President for Health Sciences, and the Associate Vice President for Administration.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the AAST East and SCC PDS for the opportunity. I'd also like to thank our moderators, Dr. Dillon and Dr. Besef. And I'm honored to be in the presence of this esteemed group of discussants. So I have no disclosures. As Dr. Besef mentioned, I attended Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine. And I took the non-traditional route because when I was applying for medical school in the Chicagoland area, I was accepted at a couple of medical schools, but because I was a foreign grad, I wasn't given acceptance to those schools. And Midwestern University gave me the opportunity to be able to go to medical school. So I really appreciate that. And during medical school, I was fortunate to be under the wings of Dr. Don Fishman in the far right of your picture, who is a trauma surgeon at Olympia Fields Medical Center, and also did some rotations at Cook County Hospital, where I worked under Dr. Barrett in the far left and Dr. Files. And Dr. Files was, I'd say, just about a year out of his fellowship. And both Dr. Barrett and Fishman were class acts and wrote letters of recommendation for me for residency. Now, in applying for residency, it was a little different back then because you couldn't apply as an osteopathic student through the regular match process. You had to go through what's called a fifth pathway, which is for international students. And normally when you go through that pathway and your name is matched to the school and it comes out in US News. And so you get your match on that day. I was fortunate to match at the King George Medical Center, and I'm fortunate that they gave me that opportunity. And then towards my last year of residency, I was teed up for a trauma fellowship. But it turned out that my parents won the green card lottery, and they were supposed to arrive shortly after graduation. And I was thinking about it in the sense that my dad was 65, my mom was close to 60, and about whether they were going to be able to obtain jobs and sustain themselves. But because I felt it was going to be difficult for them to do that at that age, I opted not to accept the fellowship and move on to a job simply because I wanted to be able to help them out along the way. It turned out that helped them out greatly because my parents were able to live with one of my sisters, and my dad died last year. He would have been in a nursing home if we weren't able to sustain him, and my mom is still living with my sister. But I was at the Ventura County Medical Center where I started right out of residency. It's affiliated with UCLA loosely, and we got the largest family practice residency. Well, we have 45 residents. It was a non-trauma center back then when I started, and they had the acute care model. We did general surgery, trauma, we did elective cases. And during the week, you took care of your patients. On the weekend, you handed off your patients to whoever was on call for the weekend, and then you picked up your patients that following Monday. And then after 7 years, I got the itch. I got the itch to try out another job, which I did based on one of my prior residency colleagues. And I went out to the Gwinnett Medical Center, which is an adult level 2 trauma center in Georgia. Now, they follow the acute care model over there, and there are no residents. And you generally, follow your patients all the way through until they're discharged. And I was fortunate to meet Dr. Jeff Solomon at Grady, where I was teaching ATLS, and he advised that I join East. And so I joined East, and the rest is history, and then subsequently the AASD. But about 2 years after when I got to Georgia, one of my colleagues or partners at this time called me from California to come back to the same practice because they were expanding and needed to have more surgeons involved. And it was a difficult decision because we had 2 small children. One was 3.5 and the other was barely 1. But I made the decision together with my wife to move back, and we moved back to California. And when we returned, I helped develop the trauma system, which was already ongoing. We had started before I left, and when I came back, we continued the process together with our CEO of the county, as well as the EMS and Dr. Javier Romero, who we worked together really well. And also there was Dr. Kimbrough, who was there briefly, but subsequently we had to fight to get to be a trauma center. And there was a contentious board of supervisors meeting, which we presented our case and finally got through that and were awarded the adult level 2 trauma center designation by the EMS. Now, in terms of work-life balance, when we moved back to California, my wife had decided she wanted to go to law school, and she was accepted to UCLA. UCLA is about an hour and a half away from where we live. And with 2 small children, that was difficult. But fortunately, we had a good family friend who was able to come out to our home each day to help out. And that was very noble of her, because she'd come to the home at about 5 or 5:30 every day, especially on days I was on call, to help take over. Now, during that process, I got to know several different areas in the county with the 2 little kids. We got to be on first name basis with the staff at the Santa Barbara Zoo, as well as the museum, and then got to go to farms to go pick berries. And it was a good time because we got to bond in that respect. Now, the current practice that we have is based on the acute care surgery model that was initially described by Dr. Gomez from Loma Linda back in 2012. We have a surgical hospitalist, and that was brought on by Dr. Romero's thinking. And we have an affiliation currently with the Community Memorial Health System surgery residency. And based on that, it's quite a young residency program. It's barely 7 years old, but they won the Surgical Jeopardy Championship a couple of years ago at our Southern California ACS meeting. And we have two of our prior residents, Dr. Drage and Dr. Garrett, in the picture over here. Now, we also provide a trauma, surgical critical care, oncology services, as well as bariatrics and colorectal. And we have a sister hospital, a smaller sister hospital, where we provide care. And then, it's set up in such a way that we have a multi-specialty outpatient clinic, and we contract our services to the county. And they provide the infrastructure for us. They provide a clinic setting. They have all the tools and gadgets we need that's provided. And then we hire and fire the staff, and we have a billing and collecting contract that we're still working through, and cost sharing and partnership. So it's set up this way. And Anacapa Surgical Associates is a big company that oversees the multi-specialties. We have 11 multi-specialties, predominantly just surgical specialties. And then out of that, we're contracted, meaning the Ventura County Surgical Associates is a partnership that's contracted with a healthcare agency, and we provide services such as bariatrics, colorectal, et cetera, as you see on the slide, to make the acute care surgical service at Ventura County Medical Center for inpatient services. Also, out of that, we have general surgical services provided to our small sister hospital, Santa Paula Hospital. So in terms of current practice, we're committed to quality, because that's number one on the top of our list. As you can see, we have many quality measures that or organizations that we're involved in, or programs. We were awarded the All Cases Meritorious Award for 4 years running. And we have a surgical hospitalist that starts from Monday through Thursday, 7 a.m. through 5 p.m. And night call starts at 5 p.m., 5 p.m. through 7 a.m. And actually, I'm on call in about an hour from now. But on Friday, we have one dedicated surgeon that takes 24-hour call. On the weekend, we have that call assigned to one surgeon. He or she can decide whether they want to split that into two, either 24 hours or 48 hours. I'm on call this weekend. I normally like to take my 48-hour call, so I'll do that. And then it happens every 5th or 6th weekend. We also have an elective practice in which you do cases either once a week, or you can do it twice a week. And I'm fortunate that I incorporated robotics into my practice, which is a new thing for me over the past year. And I'm really grateful for that. And we also have a half-day clinic 3 times a week, so that you can see your consults, your pre-ops and post-ops, et cetera. And then there's also administrative time that comes along with that. So some of the pros in terms of being involved in this practice are working with the residents. The residents, hold our feet to the fire. It's a lovely working with them. They save our lives and keep us going and keep us young. The camaraderie amongst ourselves. All of us in our practice are about the same personality level, and we get along really well. We have longevity. I've been in the practice for in excess of 20 years, and along with Dr. Romero, a couple of other surgeons who've been in for 16 or more years, and it's goal-oriented. We like to see that goal and go for it. And we have accountability amongst ourselves. If somebody isn't doing things correctly, and we need to sit them aside and talk to them about what's ongoing in their lives, they generally will listen, because that's the way we build things in our practice, and modify what they're doing so that we provide quality care. And there's also that work-life balance. And if we have somebody that's having some difficult times, either at home or at work, we tend to cover them and have them take time off if they need to. And there are no questions asked about that. The most important thing is work-life balance, and that way you can have a good life at work and a good life at home. The cordial medical staff is one in which I haven't seen in a long, long time. In residency, we used to rotate out of 7 different hospitals. And so you got to see how things were done in the private sector and public sector. As such, I saw how some medical staff members would go at each other and not necessarily be cordial, but at Ventura County Medical Center, being the chief of staff for a couple of years, it has been wonderful to see them get along with each other without going bat to bat and creating a ruckus based on what I hear from other medical systems. Now, some of the cons are staffing. Everyone has problems with staffing, and ours ebbs and flows, and we tend to work along with it with the administration, push for the staff that we need. And we lack research funding. We do research, but we're trying to push to get that incorporated into our algorithms so that we can do more of it. And then service lines, we want to create service lines, and that's something we're working with the administration on in terms of making happen. I love doing outreach activities, and injury prevention is my thing. As you can see, we do Stop the Bleed. We have our every 15 minutes, which involves distracted driving incidents at the high school level. And one thing that we really are proud of is our fall prevention program. In the top mid section, there's a picture of about over 300 seniors that come out on a yearly basis, or sometimes even twice a year. Obviously with COVID, that's changed, but they're dedicated to awareness, and that's what we want to create, to raise awareness in the county about the dangers of falls. And fall prevention, as well as emergency entry to exit, which is our violence intervention program, are our highlights. And I really appreciate the opportunity, and we'll be glad to take some questions whenever we get to that point. Now I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Dr. Duncan. Next up, we have Dr. Burns.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I don't have slides, I just have thoughts and the ability to answer questions. So my name is Bracken Burns. I'm a professor of surgery at East Tennessee State University. If you don't know where that is, it's in the very far northeast corner of Tennessee, about 2 hours from Knoxville, about 4.5 hours from Nashville. I also am an osteopathic graduate. I went to the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine. And as some of you may know, until recently, there were two different matches. I went through an osteopathic match. I matched at Doctors Hospital and Grant Medical Center, part of the Ohio Health System in Columbus, Ohio. That's where I did my residency before pursuing fellowship right about the time that the fellowship match had first started. And I matched at University of Cincinnati, where I did a 1-year surgical critical care fellowship. After that, I went on to the University of Florida College of Medicine in Jacksonville. I was on faculty there for 8.5 years, wore a number of different hats, including associate program director for the residency, medical director for the flight program. And I just got to the point where I kind of wanted to put my own stamp on something. And I had this opportunity to interview at East Tennessee State University and kind of change a program that was, I guess, what you would call a fixer-upper. So if you're a HGTV kind of guy, I did that type of project with a trauma center. I can't even change the inner workings of a toilet in my own study. So but I took this project on, and I wanted to build a practice that I wanted to be part of. And, one of the people that I came across when I was interviewing for fellowship, and my fellowship interviews, there was no Zoom back then. So it included how many places I could hit in 1 week in my car, because that was all the time that I was given off, and that was all the money that I had. But one of the people that I met and was very impressed with, as anybody would be, was Dr. Rotondo. And what he had set up at East Carolina at that point was something that really stuck with me, not only through fellowship, but when I was early in practice. And when I had this opportunity to kind of make something my own in East Tennessee, then I decided to take that leap of faith. So the program I took on at the time is a level 1 state designated trauma center. They had just come off a site visit where they had 15 deficiencies and 5 areas for improvement. That's not good in case you've never been through a site visit. They had two trauma surgeons at the time. One was employed through East Tennessee State University. One was employed through the health system. So they were on entirely different contracts, and a whole lot of locums folks kind of filled out the rest of the schedule. And I looked at this and I met with a guy named Bill Browder, who's my chair, and a very unique, very affable individual. I was actually in East Tennessee to teach a disaster management class that one of my mentors, Rick Freiberg, had helped put together for the American College of Surgeons. And Dr. Browder said, "Well, I see you're going to be in town. Let's go have lunch." And by the end of the day, he had convinced me that I was interested in this job for reasons that I don't really know. And I went home and I told my wife, "I think I'm interested in this job in East Tennessee." And she said, and I quote, "You're not where?" And it took a little convincing, but we moved up here, and it has been nothing but a success. And I think that's part of my talk to all you out there. It's really about finding what you like about acute care surgery, and it's about finding those mentors and folks that'll help you be successful from a career standpoint. So from where we started, we've had 2 state site visits since that time with 0 deficiencies. We've gone from those 2 people that I told you about to now a full academic faculty at 7.5 full-time equivalents. We have 1 person that shares times with us and with UT in Knoxville. And we've really kind of developed from just a straight trauma only doing our own critical care to now we have obviously trauma, but we also have a surgical critical care service that consults for all the other surgeons in the hospital. And we're now doing 50% of the emergency general surgery. We don't do elective general surgery. Part of the institution that I'm at, and part of, I think, being successful in building a practice is recognizing where you are. And so I came into what I think used to be a community hospital having an identity crisis that was really a tertiary referral center. And so we just slowly dipped our feet into the emergency general surgery aspect of things. And we now cover every other week. We just recently added a chief resident and intern from our residency to specifically cover that emergency general surgery component of our practice. And, you know, I think the thing about our practice that I like is that it is really designed to be work-life balance friendly. That was something that was always important to me. Both my kids played sports growing up. They're both in college. They're both still playing sports, but I was a coach. I still dabble in coaching competitive soccer. And people say, "How in the world did you fit that into your schedule?" And it's because really it was about finding that balance for me and for my family. And so the people that I bring on board, and as we try to set up our practice, that's really a priority. So, you know, I have one partner whose husband takes a class every Wednesday night. I don't put her on call on Wednesday nights. And I have people that say, "Here's my kid's soccer schedule for the month." And it is so much easier to make a schedule that says, "Here's your week of doing this. If you don't like it, change it." But we really try to make the focus on the individual. And I think that leads to increased productivity. I think it makes happier people that are more willing to work with the residents, that are more willing to do that academic side of things that we've really built from scratch at this institution. And I think that's something to be proud of. So I think when you're looking at opportunities, I think the first question to ask yourself is, what do you really like about acute care surgery? Are you a trauma heavy individual? Do you like the elective practice component that Dr. Duncan put in there? Is it about work-life balance for you? just a whole lot of different things that I don't think that people really told me when I was first looking at things. And I hope that that goes to some of the questions that you might have a little bit later on about how things might be structured or where priorities lie in different practice models. But I look forward to answering questions as we go forward, and I will turn the floor over to Dr. Rotondo.
Thanks so much, Bracken. and to Dr. Duncan as well. So two really excellent pictures of practice settings that are quite different. Yet there's some really common themes in there that I'm going to try to hit on as well when I make my own comments. So I'm going to start with this. I don't know if you can see this. This is my beeper from the University of Pennsylvania that I got in 1989, which I still have. It barely talked to you, it screamed at you. And I'm starting there primarily because I want to try to hit on some of the evolution of acute care surgery over the last 20 plus years now, which went from something that didn't even have a name really to now something that's a really desirable specialty. In fact, the data that I just heard of the AAST was that really more than 25% of this past year's graduates from general surgery programs entered into our fellowships, and our fellowships were almost full, which is extraordinary. In the early 1990s, there was still a dichotomy that exists across our specialty. There were those, like we were at the University of Pennsylvania at the time, believed that traumatology and critical care was its own thing, and that general surgery, particularly elective general surgery or emergency general surgery, wasn't necessarily a part of it. There were other schools of thought. J. David Richardson really led this, was quite aggressive in his discussions, and J. David has just passed away, but he turned out to be quite prophetic in that general surgery is the core of acute care surgery, and that being able to do emergency general surgery and having an aggressive, a robust practice would clearly be an important part of it. So as we began to build the trauma center at Penn, and I was very much steeped in that culture in the early years, fortunate that we were in West Philadelphia and the penetrating injury rate was so high that we operated every night and all day the next day. And of course, it was in the era of damage control, so we were doing a lot of reoperative surgery as well. I also spent time at Brandywine Hospital, whereas Penn, we were a completely contained unit of academic surgeons that covered trauma and surgical critical care. There, our surgical critical care coverage model at the time had anesthesiology and pulmonary critical care melded into it as we were building surgical critical care. You have to remember in that era, and I think I had one of the earliest certificates in surgical critical care. There weren't a lot of surgeons that had a certificate in surgical critical care around 1992, I guess, or one or two when I got my certificate. So it was a mixed model. When I went out to this place, this is my beeper from Brandywine Hospital. I was there for about 2.5 years, half time. I went out on behalf of Penn to a level 2 trauma center that had 100 beds. At any time, there were about 60 patients in that hospital. The vast majority of them were trauma patients. And the reality of it is that hospital in that era had lost its accreditation from the Pennsylvania Trauma Assistance Foundation. And I was asked to go out there in one of my first leadership roles to be a trauma medical director at a level 2 in a mixed model of academic and general and community-based general surgeons. And I have to tell you, it was a fabulous experience because putting those two elements together, we both really learned a lot from each other as we were trying to sort through how to manage this continual load of patients in a hospital that was really under-resourced. So very different model than the model we were at Penn, and I existed in both worlds for about 2.5 years. It was interesting, going out and being on call after having been in an academic setting and taking call at Brandywine Hospital with no residents, where you were the attendo fellow residern. You were sort of everything and had to do everything. And it was actually quite refreshing. I remember really loving it and making those hey howdy rounds at night with the nurses in the ICU. We did in-house call there, trying to tuck everybody in. Not that anybody was tuck-inable at the time, but having that level of connection with the patients and the staff, and that level of connection with a private general surgery group who were equally as committed to caring for those patients that we were, as well as their elective patients. And we would oftentimes make sure that we made them available to take care of those elective patients that they were going to operate on, because they were extremely important in the community as well. It was very, very a great experience for me to be in that setting, that mixed setting. Went back to Penn for a couple of years and then made that sort of radical move out of a university-based level 1 academic center that was primarily urban-based trauma. I had a fair amount of both pediatric trauma and blunt trauma experience at Brandywine, as well as at Penn, that we didn't do kids at Penn. And then went to a place called East Carolina University in Bracken. My wife said the same thing. Where? That very same question came. Frankly, I didn't know where it was either. As I talked about in my presidential address for AAST, I got that call from Donald Trunke to go take a look at that job. And lo and behold, similar to what Dr. Burns has talked about, I walked away saying, geez, maybe I should go do this. Maybe I should go try to build this center and try to now take what I've learned between Brandywine and between Penn and build this resource for the people who live in this part of the country. Now, if we look at acute care surgery at this point, the idea of acute care surgery by 99-2000 had really started to germinate. The AAST was a big part of that. East was a huge part of that. People like Rick Freiberg mentioned earlier, Jerry Jerkovich, LD Britt, of course, a whole host of people. I'm not mentioning everybody. I shouldn't try to. But there was this movement that occurred, and at the time, I was on the East board at the time, and we, with Thomas Pizzito's help, produced, and I think you'll find this interesting, a paper, and I can't remember, you have to look at the reference. I think it didn't come out until 03, 04, or 05, where we did an extensive survey of attitudes around trainees and surgeons in practice relative to their thoughts about doing trauma, emergency general surgery, and surgical critical care. And the part of the story that I want to share with you is that in that very same paper, and in the research that we did, because it was a consensus paper from East, we wrote about what resources would be necessary to really have proper coverage of the patients across all 3 domains at a trauma center that had about 3,500 patients per year. And I can't remember, we estimated the number of emergency general surgery patients and surgical critical care coverage that was necessary. Don't remember all those numbers. How many surgeons would it take to have a reasonable lifestyle? What would that lifestyle look like? How much would they have to get paid? And did an FTE calculation, put a number on it, and submitted that entire body of work to the Journal of Trauma. And then editor of the Journal of Trauma, who was Basil Pruitt, would not allow us to publish it in that form. He said that, that the information, the financial information and the staffing information, the lifestyle and longevity issue, we talked a lot about wellness, being able to work out in the hospital, being able to go home the next day, working in a team environment, the balance issues that have come up now. That this is one important theme. There was no appetite for it in the literature, and ultimately we didn't publish it. We put it on our website, and then it disappeared over a period of time. But even then, the talk was that things had to change to make this a desirable specialty. At the time, also, you might find it interesting that fellows, general surgery residents coming out of fellowship for trauma and critical care, had the lowest benchmarks in the AAMC and the lowest benchmark in starting salaries that were out there. So we knew compensation was an issue. But adding in the emergency general surgery component, adding in the component that these were individuals who, for the most part, were willing to do in-house call when it was appropriate. Certainly, if you can do safe and timely call from home, that's completely appropriate, as long as the patients don't suffer for it and you've got good performance improvement monitoring. Many of these principles obviously have now come to the fore, and I think that's probably what has has changed the environment dramatically. Here's my beeper from East Carolina University. As you can tell, I've absconded with some hospital property here, but you get attached to these things after a period of time. You just don't want to let them go because, you know, they become part of your life. When I was looking at the opportunity to go to Eastern North Carolina and try to build a system with lots of support from that hospital, and I started with really, there was no one there who was fellowship trained in trauma and critical care. And they were doing about 3,000 admissions a year at the time, covering it with whoever would be willing to cover. The residents really did the vast majority of the work, but I wanted to build it with fellows who were just coming out of training, similar to what Bill Schwab did at Penn. And year by year, you know, we were able to add faculty and be able to create a contained coverage model that over time, we didn't do it right away, included emergency general surgery. If you look what Eric Toshlag has now done with that practice, and I'm guessing at some of these numbers, they've got roughly 10, 11 faculty. They're up to I think 3 or 4 fellows a year, and they're doing all the emergency general surgery. They're doing all of the surgical critical care and all the trauma, of course, in a contained model, academic model. And that's all to Eric Toshlag's credit for his leadership. I've been gone from there for 9 years. So you can see, and I'm going to stop because I want a good 25 minutes for question or 20 minutes for questions. You can see that these models have evolved dramatically. And my colleagues have covered the fundamental principles going into a practice that would allow you to self-actualize. That's sort of a heady expression, but you have to go to a place where you can, you know, ply your craft in a way that makes sense to you. You want to be able to build your base and grow over time. You want to have good partners who will resource you around the things that you don't know. You want to have that life where you can be with your family and be with your kids. And I'm going to end with this because it goes right back to Bracken Burns. When I left Penn, Don Carter gave me my pencil. This was my black pencil that he used. We all had colored pencils back in the old days that as Don made up the call schedule. And if you could not be on call because of a family issue or for whatever reason it was, he would take your color and he would put that line color. Similar to the system, it was a system of call where the person making the call schedule knew when you were available so that you could actually manage your life as well as manage your professional life. Very, very important that happened. And when there were conflicts and we had some basic ground rules around the holidays and the like, we would work them out. But you almost never had to make a switch because everything was happened in prospect. Probably the most important thing, and it came up in Dr. Duncan's thought, those guys work as a team. I could tell by how he described it. They take care of each other. They make sure that there's a certain level of esprit de corps, that the quality is what it needs to be. So you can structure the call however you like. The pay can be whatever you want it to, whatever it can possibly be. But these are the elements that really determine success or failure and when you're structuring acute care surgery service. Thanks for the opportunity to make those comments. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for some really interesting stories, some great insight, and some great advice moving forward. The next part of this is really more designed to be a question and answer session. Navpreet and I have come up with a few questions to sort of kick things off, and then we'll open it to the participants as a whole. Again, please type your questions into the Q&A, and then we'll get to them. But, you know, given that all three of you come from such very different backgrounds and very different practices, one thing that we'd really love to hear about is what are the challenges? What do you feel to be the most challenging part of your practice?
Tom, you want to go ahead and take that to start?
Sure, I'll take that first.
Mhm.
I think in terms of my practice, the most challenging part is breaking bad news to the patients, breaking bad news to the patient's family. You never get used to that, but you learn along the way. And it's obviously nice if you have a palliative care team that works alongside with you. And we have a great connection with our palliative care team. And it's lovely what they do, because as surgeons, we go in to see the patients, we go to the operating room, take care of the patients, and we don't necessarily have that part of us. Although I know there's a fellowship that has been developed in collaboration with the surgical critical care realm in terms of palliative care. But it's nice to have our palliative care team members with us. So that's the most challenging part for me. I think also, realizing that regardless of your capabilities and your accomplishments, there will be times when patients will refuse care that you are available to provide because of your skin color. And I've encountered that a few times. It's unfortunate, but you keep on working through that and you do the best that you can.
Yeah, I think I might just add that, I've been in now leadership and administrative roles for quite some time, even when I was really clinically active, which I no longer am. But I think that I will say that there isn't anything that I do at 2 PM that was more complicated than what you all are doing at 2 AM. And I think having a really appreciation, you hope that your institution has appreciation for how hard the work really is, because it is very, very challenging work. Dr. Duncan mentioned a really significant aspect of it, but having that level of responsibility in a patient who is dying in front of you in the operating room, and you're trying to intervene on that is challenging. I would put on the list also the personnel management issue, being able to keep everybody in balance. Physicians in general they're high performance machines. They need a lot of care and feeding. And particularly if you're in a leadership position, or if you're just a really good partner, you're attending to the people to your right and left and making sure that you're doing everything you know how to do to keep them in balance. I think, that vigilance of that's necessary for mutual support is a challenge to maintain that over time.
I would just dovetail onto that. We recently went through an experience where due to low vaccination rates and high COVID rates in Northeast Tennessee, our medical critical care folks came to us basically with their hands out saying, we can't take the volume that's going on right now. And we had a very significant stress on our practice, literally until 2 nights ago, where for 8 weeks, we basically stood up a in-house COVID ICU team, which basically doubled our clinical activity for 2 months. And just those stresses that I've seen, not only in myself, but on my partners, and trying to have a practice that's based on balance and productivity from an academic standpoint. Those are real challenges when you have to step up to situations like that. And I'm very proud of my team and what they did do, but we definitely took some blows from that.
Thank you for those answers. Actually, Dr. Burns has touched up just a little bit on the next question, which is academic productivity. I think a lot of individuals, especially people that are involved in AAST, EAST, LCC, PDS, really do prize academic productivity. With the different setups that we have just discussed during this past 30, 40 minutes or so, how conducive are those setups for you to engage in academics and to do research and those types of things?
Yeah, in our center, we push the academic issue. We work with residents, and so we want them to do research. Like I mentioned in my slides, we don't have a big core research department per se, but we have a PhD who's collecting all the research and is able to navigate all of that for us. So we do our share of research, and the residents love that. Now, some of them obviously take time off to do research at a certain stage in the game, but we try to encourage them to do the research to be able to go out into practice later on to fulfill their dreams. So it's not that difficult for us to continue research in our centers, but it certainly helps when you have funding.
Yeah, I think this, we need to touch on an earlier point, and that is, I would advise people to seek, if they're really interested in doing research, whether it's comparative effectiveness research, bench research, translational, clinical, doesn't matter. They've got to go to a place that values it. And that means that it has to be funded in some way or another. People need, and I can tell you that they have to be given time, and that means that they will not be clinically productive during that time. And so you've got to find you've got to be quite savvy about finding the funds for that. And not everybody, particularly with what we do and how we do it, is going to be NIH funded. The vast majority of people will not. Even the vast majority of people seeking NIH funding full-time as PhDs do not have NIH funding. It's a model that has gone by the wayside. My own thought is that for a period of time, we're going to be heavily subsidizing using clinical margins, but we have to find OPM, other people's money, to be able to come in to continue to fuel that effort. You got to go to a place that values it, or you'll never have a chance to do it. And the old way of thinking, honestly, the things that I signed up for and was fine with, just no longer flies, and it's not practical. It's not good for you. It used to be, that's what nights and weekends are for, to do your research. It just doesn't make any practical sense anymore. So you've got to work harder if you're in a leadership position to make sure that you create an environment in which people can succeed. Your clinical arena has to be a classroom and a laboratory. You've got to find a way for them to have the resources to do it.
Yeah, when I was at UF, we had the night and weekend model where, yes, you were expected to be academically productive, but how you did that was on your own time. And certainly we had very high RVU targets. We were very busy, as many level 1 trauma centers in urban areas are. But when I came here and I tried to build something, I think one point we haven't hit upon is it's really crucial that you have the support of your division chief, your chair, and also the administration of the hospital. And I was able to create that buy-in. So we actually have a system which is very, I don't know, unique, but it is fairly rare, where there is 0 RVU productivity targets for my partners. So we all take an equal share of the call. We all have an equal share of the clinical responsibilities, but we also put a lot of value on the academics. And as we're trying to build and emerge as a center, both the hospital administration and the administration of the medical school were supportive of that and getting us the number of people we need to have that balance and to hopefully start to turn out some higher quality research as the upcoming years come through.
Great, thank you so much. Building on that question a little bit, in addition to academic productivity comes service both to your institution as well as to societies as well. So in a similar vein, how easy in your current models is it to get involved with societies and with committees and provide that service and that interaction?
Yeah, I think from a standpoint, it's not that difficult per se, but it's nice to have a mentor to guide you through. If you have a mentor to guide you, then it makes things a little easier. It's nice if you want to go into surgery or trauma or critical care, that you latch onto either AAST or the East, you show up at the meetings and you meet some of the mentors who you either idolize or don't idolize, and they can get you to the point in which you can sign up for committees. When you're on the committees, you put your time in it, you do the work, potentially contribute to publications, and that'll take you a long way. So, by having those connections and mentors, that's the way to go in regards to the committees. We at our center value the fact that when others are on committees, they bring back useful information to use in our center, and we promote that. Yeah,
I would just say that it is mentorship and it's the leadership whether it's in your practice or your division, depending on if you're looking at a private practice model or an academic model. I have two faculty that have graduated just a year ago from fellowship. We sit down every 6 months and I try to help them figure out which directions to go as far as taking things on. I will tell you one common personality flaw that most of us on this call have is the inability to say no. And I think what we need to learn is to say yes to things that we're passionate about and do them very, very well. I think my first 3 years in practice, I took on anything anybody gave me, but maybe didn't do some of those things as well as I could have or should have or would have liked to. And I think finding your niche and your passion about what it is about acute care surgery, it allows you to be more successful and certainly more productive. When residents come to me and they say, oh, I want to help with a research project, I'm like, well, what are you passionate about? Because if you give somebody who's passionate about gunshot wounds a research project on geriatric falls, there's a good chance you're not going to make a lot of the deadlines. And so it's really about personal development and recognizing what is important to you. I think the opportunities are great in a lot of the national organizations as far as early involvement. East is obviously designed for the younger surgeon, and there's plenty of opportunities. But if you're going to take those opportunities on, you have an obligation to do a good job.
And the only thing I'll add to that, just one brief comment, is because the mentorship is really important. I think one thing a lot of people don't understand is the most important thing is just to put your hand up and to say you want to do something at the organization. You need to be able to network and say that you're interested in working on such and such committee and why, provided you have the support of your mentors and back home. But a lot of times it's just about raising your hand. And now, you know, the watchword on this was, you know, you had to network aggressively at the meeting. You had to try and meet some people, send a follow-up note, etc. Now it's much easier to network using social media and to promote your personal brand on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, provided you're doing this in a professional way. You can advance your personal brand in a very way. But I would recommend that beyond the advancing your personal brand and beyond that, you actually have some really bona fide accomplishments behind it as well, outside of just being an influencer within our specialty, because we're seeing a lot of people who really are influencers, but by the same token, they may not necessarily have made any real contributions to the field. So you want to kind of have both. You want both. Navpreet, I see you smiling. I'd like to know what you're thinking.
No, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think social media is good, but there's also kind of a lot out there, and I think it's a really great comment. The last question that Kobe and I had was, what is the single most important thing you wish you knew prior to starting your practice? And for some of you, these practices have kind of evolved with some time, but I would basically just focus on your current practice.
I'll start with that one, because hopefully my comment is anachronistic and it no longer applies to most people. I think, you know, because, you know, I've obviously, as many of you probably know or don't, but I've taken on a lot of big challenges in my career. Starting the trauma center at Penn with Bill Schwab, going to East Carolina, which was untamed, even coming to the University of Rochester to take on this job to integrate the practice. By the time I got here, believe me, I knew, but early on, the toll it takes on your family when you decide to climb those mountains are really, really significant. And I think on the one hand, and I'm talking late 80s, early 90s, it was just something that I expected, you know, we all expected and we all did it, but it was hard. And were it not that I have the spouse that I've had since 1983, I would not have survived it. But she had paid a huge price for it. I think the family toll, I wish I had a better insight into that. I'm not sure it would have changed what I did, but at least I would have known what I was in for.
Yeah, I want to add to that by saying you are correct. You need somebody very supportive to get you through. Now, when my wife wasn't an attorney, she didn't appreciate the amount of time that I spent away from the family, in the sense that, I was busy and, she wanted some family time. But now that she's equally as busy as I am, she really appreciates that. And I'm a little happy that she's busy, so that she appreciates how difficult it is, in a sense. But at the same time, we always find time for the family. We have a child that's now at UC Davis. She just turned 18 and she's been there for about 3 weeks or so. And fortunately, things are going well, but we wanted to be able to bond together and ensure that the kids had a good life and raise them properly with respect and honor. And we have a 14-year-old who's currently a sophomore in high school. And we think both of them have a good temperament, and we'll see how it turns out. But yeah, family time is so important. You never want to lose that about yourself.
I think the biggest thing that people coming out don't realize is somewhat the very purpose for why we're here tonight. There's such a variation in practice across acute care surgery. You really want to, obviously you want to live in a climate that you like, or by your family or whatever, but you really want to make sure you're in a practice that fits your personality as much as you can. And I think a lot of people, the first thing and the last thing they think about when they look at their first job is, how much am I getting paid? And I can tell you, you can get paid a decent amount of money and be way overworked, and you can get paid more than that money and have a better lifestyle at other places. And so don't think that it's about money as the final product. I know coming through residency and fellowship, it certainly helps to be able to make a better living and to provide better for your family, should you have one. But the bottom line is not the dollars and the cents. It's the people that you're going to work with. It's, are you in a supportive environment? Dr. Duncan talked about how he works in a collegial environment. I also feel I work in a collegial environment. I've been exposed to non-collegial environments, and it just makes everything a lot more difficult. So trying to learn as much about the practice as you can and figuring if that fits you and your personality, I think is the biggest mistake most people coming out make. And that's why most people don't stay at their first job for more than a couple of years.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think at this point, we'd really like to open up questions to the attendees. We have a couple so far in the Q&A and in the chat. So one more solicitation to please put your questions in the Q&A as we get going here. The first question is from Dr. Alejandro Candil. And the question is, where do you see the ACS model going in the future?
Well, I guess I'll take a whack at that. I mean, I think the trajectory so far has been clear and steady now for the last several years, that we're going to see, because I think it dovetails hand in hand with the employed physician model, because the country is turning to a completely employed physician model, and that's being driven by the economics of downward pressure on professional fee revenue and what's happening on the on the technical revenue side as well, where there just isn't enough money in professional fees at the moment to continue to stay in those private practice models. The overhead's going up. So what will happen is as I believe, and I could be wrong, that this employment model will continue, and there will be general surgeons who have fellowship training in not just surgical critical care, but in acute care surgery, all three phases of it, and continue to have robust practice in that area. I will say though, I do think people will select, that there will be options to just focus on critical care and maybe emergency general surgery, or critical care and trauma, or just critical care. I think we need to leave that flexibility in place too, because we're not all the same. We have different interests. But I think we'll see more and more employed models, more and more in-house models in virtually every setting, including the larger level 2 trauma centers, not all level 2s, because it gets to a point where it's just not practical. They can't do it. But that's what I think.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better.
All right, so our last question for the night is from Zoom user. What are, do you have any advice for fresh graduates with coming from surgical critical care fellowships that may not feel comfortable operating independently when they take on their first jobs?
I think the first 2 years out of training are the most important years. That's when you learn the most. You know, you make a lot of mistakes and then you correct yourself, you learn and you move on. But if you aren't comfortable operating independently initially, it's always good to be in a group practice where you can lean on somebody. You know, if you have a case in which you need to discuss and you can talk to them about it, or if you need to go to the operating room and you need some help, you have them available. And that's the way we have our model, such that we are always available for the new person that comes on board. And there are no questions asked. If we have a call from the individual who's on call and they're in trouble and they have a question, we're right there. You know, we all live about 5 to 7 minutes away from the hospital, except for a couple that live in Santa Barbara, which is half an hour away, but we're available at all times, and there are no questions. There's nothing like a silly question or imposing, and we always want to make things easier for them to assimilate into the group.
Yeah, I think what you just heard is the type of practice you want to work in is one where you have someone like Dr. Duncan and his partners, right? So this individual has some concerns about their operative ability independently. They're probably better at it than they think, but maybe they need that mentoring and that support. That's something you need to be open about during the interview process, and find a group of individuals that are interested in bringing people on and helping them develop professionally, including their operative skills. You know, one thing that you will find out in your career if you go on to take on leadership positions is, you know, one of the benefits of doing acute care surgery when I first started is when you're on, and when you're off, you're off. But as soon as you get the pager that puts you as being the boss, you're never off. And you want a boss that says, you call me day, night, anytime, whether I'm in the country, whether I'm on call, whatever, I have your back. You're part of my team. That's what you want. Trauma and acute care surgery is a team sport now, and you want to join a group that you're going to have people that are going to support you, and they're going to build up your strengths, but they're also going to support your weaknesses.
That can't be said any better either. Couldn't agree more. Beautiful.
Great, thank you so much. We did actually have one final question come up, and that is, do most job offers or interviews come from personal connections, or do you heavily rely on the job boards and other posting sites and more formal avenues?
I mean, I think it's still a combination of both, but I'd be interested to know what my colleagues think. I think it's a combination of both. One thing I'm thrilled about are the things that East and AAST and the other organizations have done to get the word out in a more fair and even-handed way. You know, what used to happen was, you know, there were some hives. You know, there were 6 or 7, 8 programs out there that in many ways were the master puppeteers. And there were a lot of really talented people at places that were not as well known because they weren't on the podium every week. So kids didn't have a chance to really match into those programs. So I think it's gotten a lot better with what has happened of information dissemination across by virtue of what the organizations have done. And again, by virtue of what's happening on social media, because I do think that you can get a lot of interesting information, much of which can be verified one way or the other from social media about what jobs are out there, what places are like. So I think it's a combination of all of those things. What I think is really important is that we look for committed people coming out of all of the programs, not just the top tier programs, the so-called second tier or third tier program. There's just some exceptional people across the country that are really committed to this. And you know, those are the people that you want. You want people who are committed and willing to never stop learning. You know, I always say, once you think you're finished, you actually are. So, you know, you don't necessarily want to adopt that. You want someone who really is never finished and is continually learning.
Yeah, I agree. It's a combination for sure. And I couldn't say any better either.
I agree. It's a combination. I think if you can find good mentors and build those relationships, I think that certainly helps you as well. So being a DO graduate, you know, coming out of the University of Cincinnati, when I applied to the University of Florida, Rick Freiberg picked up the phone and he called J. Joe Hanningman and he said, "Tell me about this kid." And he said, "If I had a spot, I'd keep him." And Freiberg said, "Okay, send him down." Right. So there is something to be said for doing a good job where you are and having those people be able to speak for you, because trauma is a small world. And, you know, the residents are always surprised when they come in and they say, "Oh, I'm interested in doing a fellowship and here's the places I'm looking at." And I'm like, "Well, I know somebody here and I know somebody there." And, you know, I'm not Mike Rotondo, right? So if I know people somewhere, then a lot of people know people somewhere. So it's about doing a good job so that people will stand behind you and give you a good reference.
You know, I think to mention one other thing. It is the type, I mean, I'm proud of the fact that I work with people like you and people who are on this call, on this Zoom. It's the culture that we have is that, you know, if any of you received a cold call from a PGY 4 or 5 that didn't have really a mentor, tell me you wouldn't spend as much time as they want on the phone talking to them. You know, that's how I met Joe Saccharin. I met Joe Saccharin when he was a PGY 4. I was a visiting professor at Inova Fairfax, and he basically walked up and said, "I'm Joe Saccharin and I'm interested in going into trauma." And he's been one of my mentees since that day. Any of us would do that. I know that for sure. If somebody had the courage just to, you know, just make that cold call, write the letter, approach somebody. I think anybody in a leadership position, anybody who is active in practice will do whatever it would take to network a committed person to the next level. I'm certain of it. I've seen that now for 30 years. People do that.
This discussion has been really productive, a lot of great career advice. I'm just going to quickly share my slides again somehow. I just have a few last announcements. Having some technical difficulties. Let's try this again. So we've previously had 2 webinars a few months ago. So you can access these talks by hitting the careers button and then going to the Townhall button. This specific talk will be archived onto this website in a few days. And last but not least, we have the virtual job fair on November 11th to 12th. And this can also be another source that you can use for looking at jobs. Again, I would like to thank our panelists. We had a wonderful discussion and a lot of really great advice from the 3 of you. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great evening.
Good night.
Thank you all so much.